Hi again then guys, and welcome to another look back to the relatively recent past of the Gran Turismo franchise, with Gran Turismo 6 in particular, for another specific look at a certain car from within the roster. Now this is a car which we have featured before, but not on its own. It didn't have its own review, it was part of a Rivals match, and probably not the kind of Rivals match which you would expect a vehicle like this to be in. And some of you guys will of course remember that match. It's the kind of car that sticks out like a sore thumb very deliberately. It's kind of a comedic aspect of that Rivals match, but it does kind of have a justified place being there, on a technicality at least, because of course first and foremost a vehicle like this is technically a K car, but unlike most K cars it's not a hatchback, and that makes it quite interesting and very specialised. Now this is not the first time we've looked at a Daihatsu Midget on the channel, because apart from the Rivals match, we also looked at what I personally prefer of the Midget range, the old school 1963 version, with 3 wheels, barely any power, really old-fashioned, bland paint schemes, which still look great on it, which was of course featured on Gran Turismo 4. I believe that might be the only Gran Turismo game to feature the car, and I believe also it was a car that you had to unlock, if I recall correctly. Now we featured that one already, we reviewed it in Gran Turismo 4, it's a pretty popular episode actually. I didn't know if other people would enjoy that car as much as I do, but apparently they do, and it's certainly worthy of being in the kind of nostalgic category that we put stuff like the Ford Model T or the Patent Motor Wagon or the Daimler Motor Carriage in as well. Very justifiably. It's old school, it's quirky, highly collectible, it's not going to win many races, but it's fun, for sure. This one, well, it's an interesting car, but it doesn't necessarily have those advantages to its name. In a different way, this is more of a modern take on a tiny specialty truck, because that was the Rivals match where we featured this. Not a super cheap car battle, not a K car battle, both of which would have been justifiable for sure, but actually the truck battle for all of the trucks and SUVs in Gran Turismo 6. And it may seem like a ridiculous notion to feature the Midget in amongst stuff like the Silverado, the Ram, the SSR even, and to some degree it is ridiculous. Of course it's not going to beat them in terms of engine size, power, torque. However, it did actually, spoiler alert, achieve a couple of points to its name for some very justifiably good things. For one thing, it's dirt cheap. In fact, this little pickup truck is one of the cheapest cars of the entire Gran Turismo franchise at only 5,740 credits. Brand new. That's not from a used car dealership or anything like that. That is dirt cheap. That's literally cheaper than a set of tyres for your average supercar in the game. Now for that, you get another advantage. It doesn't have huge power. It doesn't have huge torque. But what it does have is a tiny amount of weight. And the fact that there is so little to this car, even less than a hatchback, because of course it's only a 2-seater with just the flatbed on the rear end for carrying stuff like signs, advertising shops on the back, or carrying tiny amounts of whatever produce you want to carry, I guess. It's lighter than many other K cars are anyway. It even makes something like the Mitsubishi Minica look heavy in comparison. And there are very few cars in the game which are actually lighter than this one. You really do have to scrape the barrel to find them. Stuff like the Subaru 360, for instance, or the Fiat 500, I believe is also a little bit lighter. But with the full weight loss package, you're looking at 515 kilos. So it's lighter than an F1 car. And although that may seem obvious, F1 cars of course have the most advanced lightweight tech you can get, whereas this is just a production car. So to drop it to that lower weight is actually pretty cool, especially when, if you think of it this way, you can take that K-spec 659cc engine, so it's not even 1 litre, not even 3/4 of a litre in fact, and that engine can be tuned, thanks to a turbo, up to a pretty decent 133 horsepower, and I would say an even more impressive 131 pound-feet of torque. Now for a car, especially a small one, if you compare that to, say, a tiny European hatchback, they won't have anywhere near that kind of torque. Even if they are turbocharged, 9 times out of 10 they just won't be producing that. So, in effect, you've got almost like a sport bike level of power To put it into perspective, this fully tuned has almost the same power as the Aprilia sport bike that we reviewed yesterday from the Ride game, but it's in this tiny little pickup truck, plus, by the way, a whole lot more torque than that Aprilia had. That had around 80 pound-feet to this car's 131. That's a pretty good comparison. Now, the horsepower per tonne in fully tuned form, of course, is actually easily rivaling many hot hatches. 258 horsepower per tonne is really good for a car like this, and even when you fully tune it, the performance points are only 470, so that's super low as well. Now, of course, the question is, for under $6,000, is this more of a novelty car, like the classic three-wheeled version was, or could you actually use it to potentially win some events? Well, within reason, you probably could. But the reality is, I would still recommend it more so for the fun than with any kind of intention to race. Especially now, of course, that the servers are offline with Gran Turismo 6, so novelty racing in career mode isn't really that much of a big deal. It was much more the kind of car that was a good conversation starter online, rather than in the main career. But by all means, if you do think of an event, especially early on in the game, of course, where you could use this, then sure, give it a shot. The top-end speed isn't bad for its power, the acceleration's okay, it's not face-melting by any means, but of course the best thing going for it is the kind of average speed that you can actually hold around an entire lap because of the kind of cornering speeds that you can have in this tiny little truck. On somewhere like, for instance, Monaco, well, the big trucks would actually have trouble keeping up with this thing through the tight corners, the hairpins, the 90-degree turns. Something like a Dodge Ram cannot corner like this thing. So although on the straights, of course, those 500, 600, 700 horsepower trucks can easily dispatch it, through a really tight circuit, this is almost like a go-kart with a pickup truck on top. It's a very interesting, quirky little alternative. I do miss the original classic version, but it is still cool to have this one in the game. One of the quirkiest, one of the funniest little cars in the franchise. So sure, if you haven't tried it out yet, as I said, it's dirt cheap, so you're barely spending anything on it at all. So yeah, by all means, give it a try. You might just find that it puts a smile on your face. But that's it for this pick overall. Of course, I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.